Here in the United States, we have a common application for college. And I thought, why don't we have something like that for philanthropy? I'm Yara. I'm the founder and CEO of JustFund. Our top three qualities are simple, fast, and connect. Because we know the number one way that donors will give to a cause they haven't already decided to give to is a friend tells them to. So we can actually build that kind of technology into the software, which is coming next. Every other technology that I know of in the GMS, the grants management software space, and the nonprofit fundraising space, those are all for profits. We're the only nonprofit, which is so strange to me.
Welcome to today's episode of Fixing the Philanthropic Flow, a series powered by IG Advisors where we bring you the voices of the changemakers reimagining the rules of the game. Hello, I'm Sophie, and I've spent the last few years working across social impact programs, all focused on one big question. How do we actually change the systems that hold so many brilliant people and ideas back? I'm a program manager, a systems change nerd, and someone who believes that the ways we move money and power matter just as much as where it ends up. And today, I'm incredibly excited to be chatting with Iara Peng of JustFund. Iara, can you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about your journey?
Hey, Sophie, thanks so much for having me. I'm Yara. I'm the founder and CEO of JustFund. I have been building nonprofits for 25 years, really sort of obsessed with the role that nonprofits play in a healthy democracy and wanting to stand up opportunities for people of color, women, LGBTQ leaders who've been sort of on the sidelines of a lot of our nonprofits to really have a chance to be at the center. So I've been building in social and racial justice fields for 25 years, starting with Young People For, Young Elected Officials Network, really working to get young people and people of color into elective office, building PRISM, which is a nonprofit newsroom for people of color. The idea there, see the world through a new lens when you look at stories by people of color, for people of color. What happens when you see the world through the lens of folks who are directly impacted, who are close to the issues? And for the last 10 years, I've been focused on philanthropy. And like you, Sophie, really looking at the flow of resources. The image that comes to my mind is the dam that's there, the 80-foot dam, the thick, wall holding resources back from communities that are most impacted and who I think could do the most with our resources. I fundamentally believe people who are closest to the issues are closest to the solutions, and we need to get resources to people who have direct lived experience so we can solve the most systemic issues that face our nations. And I've been building JustFund and among other technologies and tools and systems and networks to really try to fix that flow, to get that money through the dam, break the dam, and let the resources flow to communities that need it.
Amazing. Thank you. And I've got so many follow-up questions and I'm excited to dive more into this. So today, as you kind of mentioned, the flow of resources already, we're here as part of our Fix the Flow Fellowship, which is more than a program, but it's a movement of what we call resource activists. So fundraisers and grant makers working to move money, power, and ideas differently and transform the funding system for the better. So JustFund was shared in our Fix the Flow community as an example of resource activism in action. Can you tell us a little bit more about what JustFund is and what was the moment or insight that made you realize this kind of solution was needed?
JustFund is a nonprofit tech software. We are a platform that introduces equitable technologies to funders. So in the United States, we're the nation's first and only common grant application platform. Here in the United States, we have a common application for college. And I loved the idea that you could apply once to a college and use that application to apply to any college that uses that system. And I thought, why don't we have something like that for philanthropy? And I wasn't the only one. We've been talking about a common grant application in the United States for over 30 years. And the moment for me happened when I was working at an organization called Solidaire, which is a network here, again, in the US that seeks to move money in solidarity with social movements. And we were realizing that our practices didn't quite align with our values, which is the case for a lot of funders. Our values were really, let's get money out quickly and easily to communities that need it. But our process, although well-intentioned, took sometimes 9 months to get a check out the door, and it involved a lot of labor on our side, and it wasn't quite so simple for applicants. So for example, we would say to applicants, we'll take any application you have, just email us your latest application and we'll use that one. But on our side, what that meant was we would get 300 applications, we'd use Google Drive, we'd have a folder for every grantee, and if they sent us an attachment, we'd have to go back in and update that folder. We'd have to build a spreadsheet so people could actually review the applications, and that process just was really laborious. At the end of the day, we would move, say, $300,000 to 15 groups. And that also meant that 285 groups would basically go away. There was nothing we could do for those 285 groups. And we just took a step way back and said, what could we do differently? Because we knew these groups were the groups really on the front lines of social change, right? And we knew that these groups were applying to a lot of our friends, using different application systems, asking different questions on different platforms. And we just wanted to make the process easy. So that taking that step back to see what grantees really needed allowed us to kind of just decide to do it differently. And we said, let's put a little bit of time into a common app. What would that look like? And we talked to 3 friends, right? 3 other funders, 3 other networks, and said, would you be willing to try this with us? And they said yes. And so we went, raised a little bit of capital, and we took us some time to get to what questions would we all agree that are the base of what we need to know to be able to accept an application. We got to that, minimum number of questions and types of questions, and we launched. And what that meant was that applicants who applied to Solidaire could apply to Emergent Fund and to Defending the Dream and to Amplify Fund, and vice versa, right? So we ended up with this pool of 800 groups that were able to apply to all 4 of us with one app. And we saved in that moment 8 years of time for those groups that applied. And we knew we were onto something. And we were able to then take those applications and do our own process, our own reviews. But on the grantee side, on the applicant side, we knew we were saving time, and time is power. And that to us was the moment when we said, hey, let's see what we can do with this kind of a system.
Absolutely. And I think that's one of the things that I hear the most when speaking with fellows and speaking with fundraisers and people across all sides of the aisle. It's just the unnecessary bureaucracy and red tape that can often go into these processes of applications. So to be able to take that away from people both accelerates and also levels the playing field of what people can actually do when it comes to accessing support and accessing funding. I would be really interested to dig a bit more into what the early days of building JustFund looked like. So you'd mentioned that you were calling upon a network of friends already, but did you come across any particular barriers when you were first starting out? And was there anything that you had to push through?
Oh my gosh, so many things. And probably every day, there's some type of a barrier or bottleneck. And I have to say, my favorite class in business school was process flow management. So I love bottlenecks and barriers because I know that when we find one, we have to add capacity there for the moment until we can break through that barrier and then move down to the next one, right? And the image that we use is really the flow of resources, which is so interesting that, you're using the same term because I think it resonates for so many of us. But anytime in a process flow, you look, you're trying to get from A to B and you see where there are the barriers and bottlenecks and you want to just get that money flowing through. That's helped us so much because we're not trying to solve the whole system. For us, we really wanted to solve 1 or 2 pieces of the system first, and then we can kind of move on down the road, which is what we're doing today. But when we first started, the big barriers and bottlenecks that we wanted to solve, there were really 2. One was the exclusionary nature of philanthropy. We fund who we know. How else are you going to fund? You fund who you know. So that means that our networks are a certain size and we're going to fund within that network unless we can expand the network and the groups that we're connected with. So 1 is the exclusionary nature. We fund who we know. 2, it's the expensive nature of philanthropy. It can cost up to $5,000 just to apply for funding, right? That's someone's time, and never mind the opportunity cost of that person's time, because it can take up to 40 hours to apply for a grant in our country that you're going to get 30% of the time. So is it really worth it for you to spend that time? And who has that time? So we know the expensive nature of philanthropy, that's a barrier for a lot of smaller groups who don't have a dedicated grant writer, who don't have a full-time ED, who don't even know really where to go to apply. So the exclusionary nature, we fund who we know, and the expensive nature can cost up to $5,000 and 40 hours of time. We wanted to eliminate those two things. When we ran the first grant cycle, we started to see this, where we had 800 groups apply. Solidare only knew 300 of those groups. But we opened up our aperture, to 800, where we all of a sudden had 500 more groups in our network that we could meet and learn about and introduce to our members directly, not just the staff taking in the application process. And for these 800 groups that applied, it was easy for them. They could access it. It was no longer an expensive endeavor for them. They could actually access the grant process. And when they applied for one, click through and apply to many. So that was very exciting to me. And I started to think immediately about what happens when you get to 20,000 groups, which is where we are today. What happens when you get to 200, 500, 1,000 funders using this system? What kind of change can we really make? But in those early days, I mean, there was so much that we learned. And I'm an agile kind of a leader, so I like to work in an agile framework where we're setting these small tests, and we will experiment, we will learn, and we will pivot and repeat. So, for example, before we invest in technology, we'll test different systems in through email or our CRM before we actually deploy the very expensive capital to build the idea or the feature into our technology. But I think the barriers are many. Some funders are like, yeah, we love the Common App, but we want to change these questions. Oh, we love the Common App, but we need to ask these 17 additional questions. People have, I think, a heart and a desire to want to move to a common application model, but they still had a need for some specificity. So we actually had to change our entire Common App structure to accommodate for that. So we moved from this common application model to a common application profile that we have today, where groups fill out the profile, and then every funder can ask up to 3 specific questions and request up to 3 attachments. No more, but they have some level of specificity to allow them to adopt this kind of a model.
So it's been a process of going in with the dream idea and then balancing the needs that have kind of emerged between the groups as you go through. It's so often that we view the needs of both people fundraising and then the funders somewhat antagonistically. So I think it's brilliant that you've been able to create an elegant solution that serves both simultaneously. Is there anything that you wish you'd known when you were launching JustFund, when you were starting your journey of trying to change the system, that you think might help others to disrupt systems?
Yes, I think, the agile style of building relies on, failure. You test, you see something's not working quite right, you adjust and you repeat. But I think I'm human and I have an aversion to failure like everyone else, even though I really learned in building JustFund to kind of go back to my early days as a gymnast, where we would compete, you'd get your score, and then the coaches would go back to those moments where you got dinged, on a particular, skill, and you'd work on that skill before the next competition. And so I had to kind of go back into this idea that failure is a teacher. Right? Failure is actually not just a teacher and not just inevitable, but it's really a huge gift to any founder, because the faster you fail, the faster you learn. So I started seeking out to fail, because I knew that if we could close the doors, we had like 12 hypotheses, sometimes more, in terms of how we'd unlock the next barrier. If we could actually set a very concrete hypothesis and prove it wrong fast, we could close the door and move on versus keeping 12 open doors. So I think for me, if I could really have embodied the idea that failure is the best teacher earlier, that would have really helped us. And even so, I've been doing this now, for 20 plus years, and building JustFund for just over 7. I still find myself trying again and trying again, even though I know that that's not the winning solution. I want to try something a different way. So I still fall into those patterns of not listening to what the market's telling us, what the technology is telling us, what our clients are telling us. So it's a discipline that you have to kind of reground in, and it's really helpful to have a team that understands that failure is not just inevitable, but it's a gift and it's an opportunity to learn faster what the market's telling you. So failure, I think, in really leaning into it is one thing. The other thing that I just kind of touched on is really listening, really being disciplined to listen to real users. I think it was particularly difficult for me because we have a family foundation. I helped start multiple donor networks across the United States. I was early into Solidare. I was the founding board member of Donors of Color Network, other kinds of systems that were trying to move money. And so I thought I knew what donors needed and what foundations need and what program officers need because I've worn these hats. But I'm not the user on JustFund. We have real clients and we have to listen to them, watch them, learn from them, and test, experiment and figure out if what they need is what everyone needs, right? So I think that's also really learning to listen to the actual people who are using the platform, not just the funders, but the applicants too, who are the ultimate people we're trying to serve so that we can actually get to our North Star, which is to move more money to movements.
I hear you on the child gymnast point. That was also how I spent a very large portion of my youth. And I completely agree. And I like the way that you've taken that lesson into the concept of failing upwards, but also what we can all learn from the idea of holding the mission, the end goal, the change and the impact you're trying to have as the guiding star, but not being attached to what that journey's going to look like. I think that's something we can hold in mind, not just as we approach systems change work, but honestly, I think all elements of life as well. So as we've touched on already, the philanthropic process can be deeply extractive, time consuming and lacking transparency. I'd like to speak to both the grantee side first and then the funder side. On the grantee side, how has JustFund changed the game for these smaller or grassroots organizations?
Yeah, I think in a few ways, I'll just share that today I was just looking at we have a report that runs in real time. We've saved applicants 58 years of time. Years that they were pouring into applications. Again, we know they're going to get these grants 30% of the times. They can now put that time towards their mission. So we say do the critical work, not the paperwork. So we're timing groups to see how long it actually takes them to fill out the profile, how long then it takes them to fill out the supplemental questions, and can we win? Can we make it faster? And we're pushing ourselves against those actual key performance indicators that we set as a team to how much time can we save groups? Right? Each group, and then on average, all the groups. That's one way we've changed the game, saving them time. I think the second way is when applicants come in to apply to one funder on JustFund, they can apply to any open application. So not all funders run open calls, but many do. And we're trying to help our funders make that choice by introducing systems like an eligibility quiz or eligibility criteria, because of course funders also don't want to take in 600 applications and have to review all 600, which they would need to. They need to be thoughtful about how they run their calls and their capacity as well, to do a good job on their side. What's exciting for me is that 55% of the resources that flow on JustFund, so we're just about to hit 400 million, 5%, so over 200 million, are secondary grants. So a group comes in to apply to funder A, finishes that application, hits submit, pops open a list of other funding opportunities, finds another funder they may or may not have known about, applies to that second funder and gets that grant. So 55% of the money are those secondary grants. That's really exciting to me. That's a really important indicator that we're saving not only time, but we're democratizing access to philanthropic capital. So groups may not have known about this funder, and they may have, but we're saving them so much time in applying not just to one funder, but to many, and giving them access to other opportunities just by opening up this process. Doesn't take much, right? Groups are coming into a system to apply. Why not be able to apply to other funders too?
I think that's the really impressive takeaway of what you've done. It's asking those questions that we've previously assumed are not things that we can ask, or just challenging the status quo in the sense of so many of the practices we have, or the things that we assume to be unchangeable, are actually just things that no one has put the energy behind questioning yet. And when we question some of these really simple things, we ask, why can't we do this differently? And actually then we will reflect like, actually, yeah, with this change, we can completely open up that door. So I love that.
I think, also having a system as a nonprofit really matters because I'm not looking to turn a profit, right? I don't owe an investor capital quickly. So I don't have to push the market in one direction and generate income, right? So I have the space to really think about the end beneficiary, which is the applicant. We're trying to change funder behavior, make it easier for funders so that groups that have been historically excluded can access new capital. That's our goal. So because we're a nonprofit, we have the space to think and iterate. And I really love that. We do want to be self-sustained by fees because that's my dream. I have a dream to build a system where it's not one person, the founder, getting rich, right? But it's actually building a sustainable revenue stream for our communities. So my goal is JustFund actually has a sustainable revenue model generated by these 500 funders. That's my goal for the next marker, to be able to use JustFund, pay a fee. That fee goes into our bank account and we pay for our expenses, and anything additional to those expenses, we actually reallocate to the funds that use JustFund. So we can build this profit share system with our actual client base versus shareholders or investors. But we can actually use this system that's generating income to actually help everyone thrive in our communities, not just a few investors to make profit and, like you said, even be extractive for the systems that we need to move philanthropic capital and help communities take care of their people. So to me, that model of a for-profit in this space, it just doesn't compute, which is why I insisted on building JustFund as a nonprofit.
It's really the grantees and the people that you serve that are at the center of all of this decision making. On the funder side, you mentioned a key mission being to change funder behavior. Can you give an example of how JustFund has helped funders? So either to make their process easier or change their behavior or make processes fairer?
Yes. I mean, when you're building a software, you get to set the default settings, right? So you can actually set a default where the grant is general operating support. We are not only a software that supports funders through the grant making process. So on our platform, a funder can come in an expert funder or a beginner funder. So we work with big foundations that have program officers doing re-granting through JustFund, and we work with nonprofits that have gotten some money and want to re-grant. So some are really expert, have been doing this work for decades, and some are brand new to grant making. And our platform serves both. The platform makes it easy. We walk people through the whole process of building a request for proposal. You know, all the default settings there are trust-based. We have, trust-based philanthropy. And so we will, for example, default to general operating support. In the platform, when you're setting up a request for a proposal, you can only close your grant cycles on a Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, so that groups aren't working over the weekends. You can only close up to 5 p.m. PST, so groups aren't working till midnight. Those kinds of behaviors can be woven in, where you are implementing a check-in process so that funders can actually connect with their grantees and do a virtual check-in versus asking for a report. All of those different systems are baked into JustFund. And we also have case studies and best practices documented because we have some of the nation's most forward-thinking funders using JustFund. For example, Edgar Villanueva and Decolonizing Wealth have been on our platform for 5 years. And so they are actually embodying new way of giving. And we can use those case studies to help drive better behavior from funders who are just getting started. We just brought on a new fund that just launched. They received $40 million and they're building a brand new fund. And they're like, well, we were not really sure how we want to set up our grant making, decision making processes. Who can we talk to? Well, we have a network of 2 funders who are doing this work, really rolling up their sleeves to try to figure out the most equitable ways to give. You can talk to them, right? Or you can look at in our knowledge base, our help center, to look at articles, case studies, best practices, interviews with different clients who've really wrestled with some of the same questions that other clients have and can help make it easier.
That really speaks to how you practically translate an ethos of moving money to the front lines with love and solidarity, but into a tech company and into the processes of a funding platform. And it shows you how practically that translates and flows through into your software. So through the resource activism sessions that we have in Fix the Flow, we don't just talk about the many ways in which the funding system isn't working. Instead, we also collectively define a guiding star for how we want the funding system to be in an ideal utopian world. So imagining we're in your utopian vision, what are the top three qualities of your ideal philanthropic funding system?
When we talk about Just Fund, our guiding vision, our top three qualities are simple, fast, and easy. I would say I've evolved those to be simple, fast, and connect because we know the number one way that donors will give to a cause they haven't already decided to give to is a friend tells them to, right? It's either going to be a crisis or a friend tells them to give. So we can actually build into the technology, hey, Sophie, Yada just moved X amount to this group. Do you want to give with her? Or into the technology, hey, Sophie, I just gave. Will you join me? Right? So we can actually build that kind of technology into the software, which is coming next into JustFund, to make sure that connection piece is there. And the simple piece is so important, which is why we've invested in two UI UX designers. We have user interface, user experience designers who are really optimizing that whole flow for funders with tooltips, app queues, making sure folks know what they need to do next in their process. And we make it super fast. So we actually also not only allow funders to use our technology to set up their RFPs, they can do scoring and review through our system. They can send emails through our system. They can set up check-ins and do reporting if they need to. And we also manage disbursement. So we have a system called the wallet. We are not a donor advised fund. So you don't move your money to park your money and get the tax deduction. You move your money into the wallet when you're ready to let those resources go. So we really use that word to help funders know you can use our system when you're ready to move your money. And so folks move their money into the JustFund wallet, and we actually take on the role of grantor and disperse the grants, which can be a massive time saver for funders, and for grantees, they're so happy because they can get their grants within a week, oftentimes. So the funding's really fast. So simple, fast, and connect would be my three qualities of an ideal philanthropic funding system.
Many of our fellows are sitting on ideas, thoughts, feelings to fix other broken parts of the funding system. And we're building a whole movement for change. But for any listeners or fellows watching on Catch Up that want to be able to take action right now in their day to day, what do you think grant makers and fundraisers can start with to be part of creating this better funding system? And is there any advice you would give about moving from an idea to an action?
What a great question. I think, for me, I would say really look into this agile way of building. Sometimes perfect is the enemy of good, right? We don't need to be perfect. We need to be good. We need to solve a real problem. And we need to get into the space from ideas to iterating quickly, because you can really get stuck in an idea for years, sometimes decades, and we don't take an action. So I would say that agile system really allows us to test something small. So if you have an idea, test it. Find a client. You're going to have a loss leader. You're not going to make money right away. You shouldn't expect to do that. You find a client who has the same problem that you're trying to solve and see if you can solve it through your idea. And then ask, listen, what can I do better? What worked? What didn't work? And keep on iterating in that way with an actual real person who is trying to solve or wants you to solve that same problem that's in your mind. And I would say really make sure that you can, start iterating. Your idea doesn't have to be perfect. It isn't like a business plan moment, a strategic plan moment, 100-page document moment. It's like, here's the problem, here's my hypothesis, here's the experiment, go. And then revise, repeat, keep on doing that until you actually can hit one piece of the problem that you're trying to solve, and keep going that way. And you start building your user base in that way as well. So I would say, again, don't try to solve all the problems. If you've identified 5 or 6 problems, take one and then take 1A and try to solve 1A first, right? And you just grow from there.
Yeah, I like the idea of keeping the parameters on it. When we go through our resource activism sessions, what we work to build are action questions. And I think one of the hardest parts is setting the right scope for those action questions. Not so big, I'm going to change all of these things at once, but also not so small that you're actually kind of answering your own question. So I think that it's a very actionable takeaway for people to think about the one person who right now is already in your network, the one person you could reach out to who might need or appreciate or be open to conversation on your solution right now, and just kind of test it with them and go from there, rather than needing to be something you do, launch in a super polished way to the whole community all at once. Because I think all of us, when we're sitting on our ideas, there's one person that we can think of that, like, yeah, they'll at least have this conversation with me. They'll at least hear me out. So I like that.
Yeah, and if there isn't one person, then we probably have the wrong solution, because that one person becomes your ultimate persona of your ideal client profile of who you're trying to serve. So, if you can't find that one person, take a look at your problem because maybe you're identifying a piece of the problem that there aren't a lot of people who want you to solve that. So, you want to find that person who you know or who a friend knows who would be willing to try the beta experiment with you. And then if you can really solve that problem for that person, take a look and see, is that a persona? Is that the ICP, the ideal client profile you want to be going after? And then you're going to want to capture the market on that persona, right? So not like, oh, I can meet 15 different people's needs. Grab that market first and then keep going from there.
Absolutely. So I'm thinking of looking ahead to the future, where JustFund is currently looking at reducing the time, creating common grant applications, making it more equitable for groups and causes that are often overlooked. Is there a next frontier for fixing this flow for you?
Such a great question. Yes, we are consistently improving the technology. There's so many opportunities to improve. And now that we have 212 clients, we can really listen to them, watch them, see where they get stuck in the platform and try to, that's a barrier. That's if they jump out of the platform, go do something else, we know something there is not working, or we can ask them what happened when you got to this stage, right? There's a lot that we can do now. So for example, some of the things that we're thinking about are when a funder closes their grant cycle, there's a lot more that we can do. They just finished a grant cycle. Now at 3 months, we can say, check in with the grantee and see what else they need beyond the grant. Here's a sample email you can send, right? Do you want to run a capacity building cycle next? Where you can actually ask the grantees what they need beyond the actual check. What else do they need? Access to legal advice or financial services or fundraising, so what do they need beyond that check? And then at 6 months, introduce this group to some friends. So there's a lot that we can build into the technology that you were saying earlier, help support best practices. So that's coming next in our platform as we talk to our clients, see what they are thinking, talk to the applicants. What do they need? We already know, we just ran a survey to the 20,000 applicants on the platform today. And even at just 860 responses, we can already see the trends of what they need. And a lot of it is what I just said, connect me with other donors. I need more than just the check. And so how can we help influence funders in that behavior? That's one. Two is we actually are listening to the groups. And because there's 20,000 of them, we're going to be introducing a service that we call Thrive. And we often say JustFund is here to change the way you give so our communities can thrive. And part of that Thrive process is not just the grant, it's beyond the grant. And these groups are asking for so many more resources, connections to each other, to experts, to trainings, to workshops, that we're going to start to build that side of the platform as well. So that as groups come in to find other funding opportunities, once they're finished applying, or before they even apply, they have access to other types of learning and trainings and resources, even beyond the opportunity for new funding.
Thank you so much. I have so many more questions that I would like to ask, but I would like first to just open up the floor to fellows on the call. So anyone who has a question, feel free to pop it in the chat, or you can come off mic and be on the recording as well.
Hey, Ada. Yeah, I'd like to. I have a list, but I'll just start with the one. Thanks for that. It's really interesting and really inspiring and really exciting. So, a few questions. I guess you've talked a lot about your approach around iteration and being agile and learning from failure. I really like that. I guess specifically what barriers you talked about friend funders, which I like because quite often we put ourselves in competition with each other. So I like that you talked about friends. But I just wonder if you had any particular barriers or opposition, certainly in the early stage from funders, because we're so used to, well, certainly applicants fighting for resource, but sometimes there's an element as well of funders working in isolation from each other, and sort of behind closed doors. So did you have any barriers that way, or with that first initial group, were you all kind of on the same page? That's how you chose to work together.
Allison, I think that's such a great question. And I will answer it and tie back to this idea of an ICP or ideal client profile, because there were funders who don't like the concept of a common app. And in fact, I was on a webinar really early on, and I still scratch my head at this response. But there was a funder on the call who said, why would I want to use this system? Because I've done all the due diligence on this group. If the group comes in because of me and someone else funds them first, I'm not the first funder. And I just thought, who cares? If the first funder or not, let's get more funders in here. But there was this concept almost like venture capital funding where, well, I've done the due diligence. I found this group. I want to be the first funder. I want to control I want to be first in, and then I will introduce that group to other funders, but I don't want other funders to fund them first. I'm like, well, then fund faster. Figure out a way to fund faster. And who really cares if you're first or not? It was just such an interesting concept. And I think a place where the for-profit sector has kind of seeped into nonprofits for the last several decades, right? We all probably have professional degrees in nonprofit management now. I have my master's from that, in that field. And we moved into this space early in my career around impacts and measures and benchmarking and indicators for success. A lot of like for-profit language kind of moved into the nonprofit sector. And wish we had adopted like take risks. Right? In venture capital land, you're going to, invest in 10 bit companies knowing that not all of them will quote unquote succeed. You're not expecting them to.
Yeah.
But building a portfolio that's mixed, right? And same thing, like where else are you going to be able to take more risk than in the philanthropic sector? You don't need a return, right? You're not government where you have to like show impact in that way. This is the perfect place to take risk. And really try new ideas until you get to the winning solutions. We should all be failing so much faster because philanthropy is a perfect space for innovation and ideation, but we've kind of gone the other way of like, show me your impact. I want to see the return on my investment. And building a tech company, I don't know if any of you have read Crossing the Chasm, one of my favorite books. It's maybe 30 years old, but it talks about the evolution of a tech company. And there's a really helpful chart in there. If you even just Googled Crossing the Chasm chart, it'll show you, which part of the market you're adopting. You have your innovator market, your early adopter market, and then there's the chasm. Most tech companies fall right through because what they're trying to do is get to the mainstream market too quickly.
Mm.
So they try to get to these folks who want a better tech product, right? Who they try to get to these laggards who don't trust technology or whatnot. You're trying to get to like too big of a market too fast, and you implode, you fall through. So you really want to be disciplined to stick on the early adopter side, people who want to innovate with you, who are okay if the technology doesn't work, right? They understand what you're trying to do and they want to be a part of a movement. Folks that are here at JustFund, technology is really great now. But in the early days, we needed folks, we would say, hey, this is new. You got to be sure you're okay if the tech doesn't work. We will be there to support you as a team. We had a big client success team, but sometimes the technologies aren't going. Is that okay? Yeah, because I want to be part of a movement to reset philanthropy. If you go, and I've done it, you jump over the chasm and you grab a mainstream market client who's like, wait a minute, this isn't as good as X grants management service, right? And what happens in that space very practically is your entire client success team has to serve that one client who's unhappy. All your roadmap, your entire technology roadmap goes to support exactly the specific needs that client has versus the 99% of other clients who don't care about that particular feature. And you can delay your growth. And I have done it. I'm not embarrassed to say, but I wonder why I keep on making that same mistake, even though I know it. You think you're ready to cross into the mainstream market and you're not. You don't get those folks who think they're ready to adopt a new technology, but really are not.
That's really interesting. Thank you. I guess just on how the platform works, did have a question which you kind of started to get to on how the primary or secondary decisions are made. So is there an element of kind of cherry picking, or will the funders want to get in there first and pick the best ones, or does the applicant decide actually I'm going to this funder primarily, but then you've talked about secondary funding, so there is a process. Is that right?
That's right. And Allison, it's a great question because I had some early hypotheses, and this is the one that I was referring to that I just couldn't let go of. I'm going to figure out how to make this work. So my original idea was that use we would get these groups into the platform. And then different donors, high net wealth donors, could view those organizations and decide to fund them. Right. So at Solidare, the organization I was working at early on, which inspired the build of JustFund, we had 180 members, and the staff would run a grant making process, and we would learn about 300 groups, but we'd fund 15, and there was no way for us to share 285 organizations with the whole network. So what we have at JustFund is a software that intersects with 3 software markets: the grants management software market. So we build our request for proposals, and we run someone's grants process through the software. Profiles feed into a library of nonprofits with fresh profiles that you can come in and search and find and fund. And based on how we built the Common App profile, there are a lot of filters, over 12 filters that you can run through and learn more about those groups and find what you're looking for. That's the database market. And then there's this nonprofit fundraising market that I mentioned, of nonprofits coming in to get help, not just new funding, but resources and support and capacity. So you have those 3 markets, and JustFund sits at the epicenter there. But what we've started with is the grants management market. What we're moving into is the nonprofit soft fundraising market to help nonprofits. They're coming in anyway, so let's give them what they need. And then you have this database market that I thought would actually be the heart of JustFund. You run these grant cycles, you get all these profiles in here, and now high net wealth donors can finally move the money that are sitting in donor advised funds. Something like $250 billion sitting in there in the US market. And it didn't happen. It didn't happen that way. And so I scratched my head. We've done like 26 experiments on it. And we're still learning. And so what we've done with the technology and how we've pivoted is now when you're running a grant cycle, you can actually use the library to invite new groups into your grant cycle. So, and when you close a grant cycle, we can say, it looks like you're funding groups that meet this criteria. Here are 5 more that you might be interested in. So the secondary market as it exists right now, Allison, is that groups can come in and apply to one funder. In some cases, funders are finding them in the library and funding them directly. So we do have about 6 high net wealth donors, so not a ton, but but that group is moving about $4.5 million just by coming into the database, searching on their criteria and moving money. So it hasn't scaled in the way that I originally envisioned, like, oh, we're going to have 1,000 donors doing this work, but we're starting to find, again, like, I have to take a step back on what I wanted to build and listen to what the market's telling us they need. And once I actually took a step back and listened, I could repackage the features in a way that people really wanted. And now we're seeing people come in faster to use this kind of what we call an open call technology.
I'm just going to shout out a question that we've got from Megan in the chat. So firstly, Megan said, this has been super interesting and really inspiring. So thank you. But I would be interested to know if you're aware of any other national, so I'm assuming in a UK context, global or thematic common grant application platforms, either in existence or are you aware of anyone trying to develop one? If not, is there anything that we can do to change this and make it the norm?
I mean, that's the goal, Megan, for sure. I love the question. And I'll just say, like, looking at another market like the College Common App, it took them 13 years to normalize that practice. In the US now, there's no other, like, you use the Common App to apply for colleges. That's just what you use now. But it took 13 years to normalize that process. They first started on paper, then it went to a digital kind of platform, and then Harvard opted in. I think it was 13 years later, and that opened the door for all the Ivies and then state schools, and everyone say, oh, well, I guess we're all using this technology now. So I keep on looking for our Harvard of who's gonna be the one to normalize the process, but I recognize we incorporated in 2021. So we're just really 4 years old. Even though I started this in 2018 was the first grant cycle that we launched, we incorporated in 2021, which is, I say that because that's when I came in full time in 2021 and started to build the team and raise the capital, like really in earnest, let's make a go of this. So I think, we're 4 years into what could be a 13-year journey, Megan, before this is normalized in the United States and elsewhere. I have had many calls with funders in the UK, across countries in Africa and Singapore in particular that are interested in licensing JustFund to offer the Common App technology in their areas. But before we do that, we have to build language access and make sure that the Common App can be translated into people's native languages, and we're not there yet. So I'm not offering a white label license yet until we can raise enough capital on our side too to be able to build all these different things that people need to be able to make this global and have justfund.sg, justfund.uk, right? And actually allow other countries to be able to utilize this technology. There are a couple more questions that I'd love to answer in terms of startup capital. This is a really interesting question because again, you would think that philanthropy would want to invest in technology that's by us, for us, that technology that stays in the nonprofit sector so that it's not an extractive system. Every other technology that I know of in the GMS, grants management software space, and the nonprofit fundraising space, those are all for profits. We're the only nonprofit, which is so strange to me. So the kind of startup capital that we've raised is coming from foundations because we are a nonprofit. So we can't take and would not take venture capital funding. And that's why I incorporated as a nonprofit. So if philanthropy decides they don't want to invest in this technology, then we might have to change our structure at some point. It is my dream and my hope and my intention that we stay a nonprofit. What that's going to mean is that foundations need to underwrite the cost of building JustFund, right? Because our fees are not covering our costs, right? Where a for-profit would be raising that capital from private investors who would take an equity stake in the company. We don't do that. We take 100% of our grant capital from foundations, right? Who are not taking a stake in the company. We're a nonprofit. There are no shares to share. So the startup capital is coming from foundations. I'll just give you an example though. I'm going to talk, there are 3 other companies, for profits, that are in our space in those 3 different markets that we talked about who have raised over $50 million, right? So you look at Instrumental is a nonprofit fundraising software, just raised 55 million. GiveButter, which is a fundraising platform technology, raised 50 million last year. Resilia, which is a nonprofit fundraising capacity building platform, raised 85 million. And the kinds of money that we're able to raise, we've raised 10 million over 5 years. So just to give you a comparison of, maybe I'm not the best fundraiser too, I'm not asking for enough, but what the private sector is willing to invest in technologies is very different than what we're seeing in the philanthropic sector, at least from my experience, right? Where big foundations are investing like maybe $1 million or 2 million, which is very exciting. And we're so grateful. But what's happening in the private sector is the technology of your dreams, and build the sales arm and the revenue arm and the marketing arm, things that we don't get. The other thing that I'll say is like when you're a for-profit, you get wraparound services from a VC, right? You're getting all the sales and marketing and all of that training and support, and help us really build out our CRM, our marketing, our sales. We have to hire fractional folks who are going to do that for us. So very different there. And then in terms of any role in guaranteeing unregistered organizations, when we do the grant making, Allison, we do here in the US something called expenditure responsibility grants, where you can issue a grant to a non-501c3 for charitable purpose activity. So we do that in our wallet. If a funder wants to fund a group that's not incorporated, we can do that through an ER grant and here in the US. And so that might be similar to what you're doing over there. And we fund a lot of fiscally sponsored projects. About 13% of groups inside the platform are fiscally sponsored projects that we support. So I think it's something like 2,800 groups are fiscally sponsored, so not actually incorporated, but they're projects inside a 501c3 organization. So we do a lot of that funding. And you're asking a question here around service design and behavioral insights. It's not really my background or experience, except for you learn it. And you learn it by failing and falling on your face and sitting there curled up in a little ball under your desk and being like, what next? What do I do next? Talk to myself. I have 3 teenagers and like, Mom, what are you doing? I'm like, I'm just talking to myself. It's fine. Or my dog and I are here sitting here trying to figure out these big questions. But really it's just around reading a bunch of books, and talking to other founders and listening to podcasts. But what I really love is talking to the users, talking to the actual clients, really listening.
Well, honestly, Yara, thank you so much for speaking with us today. Thank you, firstly, for your energy and for answering all of mine and the fellows' questions, but also for what you're doing in terms of just actively tackling the challenges that we see in the funding space. I think particularly with tech systems, it can be incredibly hard to center that love, solidarity, and care that is at the core of JustFund in tech and in processes. So I think it's incredibly impressive the way that you've translated this throughout. So thank you so much for speaking with us today. Is there anything, any ways that you would like fellows to connect with you, websites, resources, anything you'd like to flag or for them to check out?
Yes, please come connect with me on LinkedIn at Iara Peng, IARAPENG, and you can come to justfund.us to check out the technology. I'm very open to doing a demo if you want to see how the technology works and talk a little bit more. I love that there are, in particular, women on this call, and I'm really excited about female entrepreneurs coming, working in this tech space and solving the philanthropic space. We are the majority of philanthropy, and especially when it comes to giving circles and collaborative funds, and it's really exciting to see this kind of energy and focus in our community and answer questions. Thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with all of you. Sophie, thank you so much for the invitation to be here today. I loved meeting the fellows and hearing about the work that you're doing to fix the flow. And I'm so grateful that there are so many brilliant minds and hearts really trying to activate philanthropy in a different way and really make sure that resources can flow to communities that have been historically excluded, and we can move more money quickly together.